feels amazing. And I get to work and I'm not sweaty like I was when I was actually working. So my coworkers think. So any other choices? Oh, well, okay. I'm being told another one for Pat's birthday. So, all right. So, and then I'm going to drop a final pebble for everything, all of those thoughts that weren't spoken today. All right. We are not going to do Standing on the Side of Love, which the composer Jason Shelton actually changed to Answering the Call of Love. He did this in response to, he changed those lyrics because he overheard one of the former UUA ministers take a call one day, and it was about, possibly overturning gay marriage, right? And he said, our position is we are standing with love. Standing on the side of love. And then Jason Shelton had that thought, and he quickly wrote it down, went back and composed the song. Years later, he started hearing a lot of voices of differently abled people, and he started thinking about the ableist language in that song, and he changed it to Answering the Call of Love. But we are not going to answer that call with the music today, because that's very much a piano song, and I didn't have time to work it up on harp in an hour. So I'm going to do another song that I think kind of fits a little bit with the idea of housing that we're talking about today. So this is not a housing specific song, but there are elements. And I'm thinking of kind of ties in with the recent 20th anniversary of Katrina. So thinking of people displaced, not having homes. So ties in tangentially. Black cat crawling on an old boxcar, rusty door and a falling star. Ain't got a dime in my nation's sack. I'm waterbound and I can't get back. It's I'm gone and I won't be back. If you don't believe me, you can count my tracks. The river's long and the river's wide. I'll meet you boys on the other side. Say my name and don't forget, the water still ain't got me yet. Ain't nothing but I'm bound to roam. I'm waterbound and I can't get home. Thanks. I'll slip you that tip tonight. Our speaker today, Dr. Jade Craig, is an assistant professor of law at the University of Mississippi School of Law. Before practicing law, Jade was appointed by the Obama administration to serve as special policy advisor to the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. He continues to research and write about racial inequality and fair housing law. So please welcome Jade Craig.
Thank you all so much for having me today. It's a real honor and a privilege to be asked to deliver a talk at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Oxford and at any Unitarian Universalist congregation because I know that I'm around people who will get it and who will understand what I'm trying to say because I've been a member of 2 Unitarian congregations myself in the past, and I'm big time here because I've got a name tag, and if you got a name tag at a UU church, you are big time. So this is great, yeah. I'd like to start with a story of a real person, someone not unlike all of us in this room, but whose decision to challenge housing discrimination in his community has inspired me ever since I learned about him as a law student 15 years ago. His name was Paul Trafficante. Paul Trafficante was born in New York City in 1921 and grew up in a tight-knit Sicilian immigrant community. He moved to San Francisco after World War II, married a woman who was white like him, and had 2 children. And I say that because that's a very important part of the story, that he was white and she was white. His day job included work selling carpets, draperies, and other home improvement services in a family business with his brother, but his true passion was political action. During this time, he and his family were living in an apartment complex known as Park Merced. Park Merced was in a middle-class neighborhood in San Francisco. Even today, it is still the second largest single-owner neighborhood of apartment blocks west of the Mississippi. The property spanned 150 acres with more than 3,200 units and 9,000 residents. This massive apartment complex was, larger than many Mississippi towns and some counties. In 5 high-rise towers and several smaller courtyard apartments. Metropolitan Life Insurance Company was the landlord, having purchased the property as an investment. MetLife tried to evict Paul because of his organizing against the Vietnam War. He was the national finance chairman for several large protests that culminated in the protest in Washington in November 1969, and which landed him on the FBI's watch list. In the process of contesting that effort to evict him, Paul uncovered information which indicated that MetLife was systematically refusing to rent apartments to black applicants. By 1970, San Francisco was more than 13% black, the peak of its African American population, but less than 1% of all of Park Merced's tenants were black. Paul's discovery came on the heels of the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The Fair Housing Act is often considered the last great legislative achievement of the modern civil rights movement. One of the few protest battles that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Effectively lost was his effort to end housing segregation in Chicago. In 1966, he moved into a rundown tenement apartment in a majority black neighborhood in Chicago to draw attention to the crowded slums into which African Americans were forced to live because of housing discrimination. After a white mob met him during his protest march through an all-white neighborhood in Chicago, pummeling him with rocks and bottles, carrying pistols, he said, "I have never seen, even in Mississippi or Alabama, mobs as hateful as I've seen here in Chicago." The effort to end housing discrimination drew that much ire, not in the South, but in a northern city. The mayor of Chicago offered some minor concessions, but no full-scale shift, and he ultimately left defeated. After years of advocating for a federal open housing law, it was not until Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, and the nation erupted in urban rebellions around the country, that Congress finally passed the Fair Housing Act a week later, and Lyndon Johnson signed it into law on April 11th, 1968. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of housing on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and later based on disability and against families with children when the act was amended in 1988. Paul exposed MetLife's racially discriminatory housing practices around 1969 at a time when the arsenal of federal authority was finally available to tackle it more aggressively. Paul, joined by his wife Margaret and other residents, sued in federal court in August 1970 to challenge MetLife's systematic exclusion of black residents from their apartment complex. But the federal trial court threw out the lawsuit because Paul did not allege that he was the target of the discriminatory housing practice. So essentially, the judge reasoned that since Paul was not a black applicant who was kept out, he had no right to file a lawsuit. And the U.S. Court of Appeals did the same. Even in the supposedly very liberal Ninth Circuit in California, they also threw out the lawsuit. The courts fundamentally, however, misunderstood the reason for Paul's claim. Paul made three key allegations in his complaint. He suffered a violation of the Fair Housing Act because one, he, as he put it, had lost the social benefits of living in an integrated community. Second, he had missed business and professional advantages which would have accrued if he had lived with members of minority groups. And third, he and other white residents had suffered embarrassment and economic damage in social, business, and professional activities from being stigmatized as residents of a white ghetto. And he used the phrase white ghetto in his complaint. Whenever I've discussed this case, I've noticed that a snicker usually comes from the audience when I mention the phrase of a white ghetto. Even the lower courts found that allegation annoying. The fact that the suggestion that white people in America could ever be living in a ghetto, quote unquote, by virtue of the fact that they lived in a community that was nearly all white, strikes some as odd or comical. And I would submit that it's a manifestation of the assumed superiority and comfort with which Americans have come to associate white communities. But in 1972, the same year this case was litigated, Joseph R. Barnes, a white Lutheran minister in Chicago, and a longtime anti-racism trainer and organizer, published a book called Liberating Our White Ghetto, which also questions the value of living in an all-white community in the midst of an increasingly multiracial society and challenges white Americans to undo the barriers that such a life has imposed on them. Margaret used other words than her husband to explain the problem. She said to a newspaper reporter during the litigation, "We were isolated from the richness of living with non-white people." There was a richness living with non-white people. The Supreme Court, however, surprisingly got it. In 1972, composed of mostly liberal or moderate justices at that time, they reversed the lower court decisions. The court broadly interpreted people's right to file claims under the Fair Housing Act. The court cited Senator Walter Mondale, who would later go on to run for president against Reagan in 1984. And the rationale that he gave when he served as the co-sponsor of the Fair Housing Act with Edward Brooke, the Senate's only black member at that time. He said that the reach of the proposed law, the Fair Housing Act, was to replace the ghettos with truly integrated and balanced living patterns. Integrated and balanced living patterns. The supporters of the act in Congress emphasized that those who were not the direct objects of discrimination had an interest in ensuring fair housing, as they too suffered. The person on the landlord's blacklist is not only the victim of discriminatory housing practices, according to the court, it is the whole community. The whole community is victimized by housing discrimination, not just the target, the black person or the person of color shut out. Paul's claim was allowed to proceed, and the landlord was ultimately forced to settle with the residents and end the discriminatory tenant screening policies. So it was a major victory. More than 50 years, however, after this landmark ruling, one rarely sees cases that involve Traficante-style claims, where a member of the majority group is filing a claim for a violation of the Fair Housing Act, alleging that they've been denied the benefit of association with the minority group. The male doesn't file the claim against the discrimination against women in an apartment complex. The families, the single people, don't file the claim on behalf of families with children who are kept out of a community. White people rarely file a claim alleging that they have a right to integration based on discrimination that keeps people of color out of their communities. Residential segregation remains nearly as entrenched as it was when the Fair Housing Act was passed. People from marginalized groups have certainly filed landmark fair housing cases that have moved the needle toward reducing discrimination. But in the context of race discrimination, if white Americans do not become involved in the effort to fight housing discrimination, it leaves the impression that they like it this way. And they see no benefit in building shared communities with people of color and across lines of race and class. The lower court's rejection and confusion about Paul and Margaret's argument reflects the fact that even today, there is not a language to talk about white racial solidarity and unity in America. Much of the discussion of race regarding white Americans is suffocated, like a person living under the weight of a wet blanket, by the noise of unhelpful tropes that frame a white American's relationship to race and racism, specifically white guilt, white fragility, and white saviorism. White Americans are often socialized to feel guilty about living as white and the racial privilege and relative social and economic security associated with whiteness. Race is a subject that is considered scary to confront and an issue to be avoided, lest the person feel discomfort or fear, which is the essence of white fragility. On the other hand, the white person who engages with people of color in an effort to further racial equality is framed as the white savior, the person who is coming in to fix communities of color and give them a handout. And sometimes that's the role they play for many reasons, perhaps because playing the great white hope is all that they know. All of these archetypes, however, serve as barriers to white anti-racism and solidarity. Indeed, they support inertia and erode the will of whites who would become involved in undoing white supremacy. Paul and Margaret's claim, however, is very different from any of these tropes. Remember, Paul is not a savior. He is not filing a lawsuit to vindicate the rights of black applicants who were denied housing. They can do that themselves under the statute. He is not afraid of dealing with racism. He is not the porcelain white person who will break if you say the word race. He's not asking a court to stop the landlord because he feels guilty that he gets to live in this fancy apartment complex and black applicants do not. Paul instead is making a claim in his own right to an integrated society. He's recognizing that segregation harms things that are important to him. He says he lost the benefits of living in an integrated community. In an increasingly integrated society as a home goods salesman, he had missed business and professional advantages, and he suffered economic damage in social, business, and professional activities that would come from living with people of color, a whole segment of society that he is cut off from. He and his wife are seeing that their world, nearly devoid of color, is one where they are embarrassed and stigmatized as residents of a white ghetto, and losing the richness of living with non-white people. In a racially diverse America, there was something in it for them. Paul and Margaret illustrate that in order for anti-racism and racial unity to work, white Americans have to feel a need to live in integrated communities because there is a personal benefit. Altruism and a begrudging willingness to let people into their communities will not be enough. Given the dearth of a language for talking about white racism and racial unity in America, I've largely made progress in moving beyond the tropes of white racial attitudes by looking to the experience of South Africa. White South Africans faced the crossroads that America is reaching as the country becomes majority minority by 2042. In fact, the future is already here. In 2014, non-white babies outnumbered white babies by about 16,000. And in 2015, the difference was about 12,000. And the gap remains. So the choice is apparent: building relationships with the majority or maintaining a policy of white separatism and white minority rule. As a college student, I spent a summer at a Center for Reconciliation in Ireland, devoted to sharing the Irish peace process around the world. The director of the program that worked with ex-combatants on both sides of the conflict in Northern Ireland Wilhelm Verwoerd. His name may be familiar because his grandfather, Heinrich Verwoerd, was the architect of apartheid. In 1960, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan delivered a speech in Cape Town that warned white South Africans that they were behind the times. 17 African countries, almost a third of the continent, gained their independence in 1960 alone, leading what has become known as the Year of Africa. I'm actually organizing a commemoration on the 65th anniversary of the Year of Africa on November 10th at the law school, where we're inviting scholars, including a professor from Harvard Law School, to come to town and discuss and reflect on the rule of law in Africa. Macmillan said in the famous Wind of Change speech, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent. Whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact." Wilhelm's family was synonymous with the evil of apartheid and white minority rule. After Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, Wilhelm broke with his family's history and joined the African National Congress, the political party led by black South Africans that fought for the end of apartheid. He wrote about his transformation in his own memoir called, not coincidentally, My Winds of Change. We became closer that summer in Ireland, and I asked him how he made sense of his own transformation. He said, "This is who I am. This is where I'm coming from. So I have to find ways to deal with it creatively. This is who I am. This is where I'm coming from. So I have to find ways to deal with it creatively." That summer, I also met Eve Anneke, a white South African woman who lived through apartheid. And she explained, people don't fear change, they fear loss. People don't fear change, they fear loss. If we take these lessons together, they beg several questions. Two of which are, what can white Americans do to deal with their circumstances creatively? And if people are afraid of loss, can they let go of their fear if they believe they have something to gain? I'm particularly excited about giving this talk to a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I was raised Catholic, but I've been a member of two Unitarian churches, one in Northern Virginia and one in Tampa. When I first became a member of the congregation in Arlington, Virginia, at the membership orientation, the pastor explained that the UU Church does not focus on the question of many Christian churches, what do I believe? As a Catholic, I spent a lifetime learning all the beliefs. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the forgiveness of sins, the communion of saints, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. I've recited it literally chapter and verse every time we go to Mass. Instead, there are two different questions one must ask in their own free and responsible search for truth and meaning. What do I love? Not what do I believe, but what do I love? And how then shall I live? What do I love? How then shall I live? Personally, I love King's vision of the beloved community. I love the vision where, to paraphrase King, one day on the fertile soil of the Mississippi Delta, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I love my white kindergarten classmates, Lance, Mary Grace, Sammy Joe, Amelia, among many others. I love a Mississippi with a black governor, elected by the majority of all the people. I love a Madison, Mississippi that is 38% black, like the rest of the state that surrounds it. I love a nation I cannot see. And I believe that many of you love the same things. So how then shall we live? We must not live with just our beliefs. We must have what law professor Derek Bell called a living, working faith. One that draws you away from comfort and security and toward risk through confrontation. A living, working faith that draws you away from comfort and security and toward risk through confrontation. Dr. King, the great visionary who I believe had many of the answers, reminded us that we must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the way God's universe is made. This is the way it is structured. And it's not unlike this idea of Ubuntu that helped South Africa go through the process of reconciliation. I am a person because you are a person. The classic belief of many Bantu-speaking cultures in Southern Africa. Dr. King also understood the essential role that the white American sitting on the sidelines plays in building that beloved community. In a letter from a Birmingham jail, he confessed to the white clergyman who opposed his protests, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." Trafficante versus Metropolitan Life Insurance is the subject of an article I'm working on about fair housing law and racial reconciliation, and it will come out in the Wake Forest Law Review next year. In that article, I suggest that Paul and Margaret's claim demonstrates the tremendous power that white plaintiffs can have by using the Fair Housing Act to further the goal of integrated communities. This charge has two parts. First, fair housing testing. Second, challenging land use policies by our cities that tend to exclude people of color, especially low-income people. Fair housing law is unique among anti-discrimination laws because there's a tradition of having people serve as secret shoppers for housing to determine the prevalence of housing discrimination in their communities. One of the professors who taught the housing discrimination seminar I took in law school, which is the start of my love for fair housing, started his career in fair housing as a tester. Fred Freiberg was a young man, a white man in Milwaukee in the early 1970s who participated in tests where he approached real estate firms to apply for housing. They would work with him to move into a white neighborhood. A black individual who was the same in all relevant respects to Fred would approach the same firm at the same time and ask for housing in the same area, and he would be told it was unavailable. This process happened to over 30 volunteers, white and black, in Metro Milwaukee. White testers who often had never seen discrimination up close and personal heard the recordings and had a visceral reaction when they saw that discrimination is real. The thing you think really isn't happening is really happening, and you can hear it on tape. They saw the differential treatment that happened simply because of race, and they wanted to do something about it. When lawyers asked them to join a fair housing lawsuit as plaintiffs, they all readily agreed. The suit resulted in putting one real estate firm out of business and obtaining significant settlements and policy changes from 3 others. Fred said to himself, "Hey, this works," when he saw this victory. And so began his journey to become the country's leading expert in fair housing testing, training organizations, and even HUD officials around the country. He also started the Fair Housing Justice Center, one of the leading fair housing organizations in New York City. The Mississippi Center for Justice, right here in our state, has a fair housing program and a testing program, and they regularly take volunteers. Here is the start of change. I'm teaching a fair housing law seminar next semester, and the plan is to have students participate in a fair housing test so they can experience the reality of discrimination and hold our own communities accountable. To bring what's in the dark to light and to hold our fellow community members to the promise of equality and justice. The real need for white plaintiffs, however, is pressing in the area of systemic housing discrimination. Affordable housing developers who want to build in high-income communities, very much like our own in Oxford, find that they meet roadblocks due to zoning laws and local government rejections. Cities use zoning restrictions to limit the kind of housing that can be built in the entire town or in particular neighborhoods in ways that ensure that housing will be unaffordable to lower and moderate income families who are disproportionately people of color. Some neighborhoods, indeed entire towns, are zoned only for single family housing in all the residential sections. Apartments, however, tend to have lower costs and fewer barriers to entry. Likewise, communities have minimum lot sizes that require houses to be, for example, on lots that are at least an acre in size. Large lots make buying land more expensive and increase the cost of construction. Local governments also impose design restrictions that increase costs, similar to what you can see in a place like Madison, Mississippi, for example. Cities zone entire sections of town for industrial use only, but no industrial use comes in and the land sits empty despite the pressing need for affordable housing. But then the city makes individual approvals piece by piece to developers who promise to build expensive forms of housing. They've held all this land in reserve so they can control who lives on it and who has access to it. All of these mechanisms are forms of exclusionary zoning, and the courts have found exclusionary zoning policies violate fair housing laws. But builders have very little incentive to file these lawsuits to push projects through because it's time consuming and expensive. And the people who are excluded, often people of color, don't have the right to file the lawsuit because they don't live in that community because they're being excluded. They live in Water Valley instead of Oxford. They live in Bruce instead of Oxford, or the resources to pursue the claims. But local residents, often middle or upper class white residents, can file Traficante style claims that challenge these policies and support affordable housing developments. Those plaintiffs, the white and upper class and middle class white residents, are specifically sort of positioned to bring claims that many other people are not able to bring. The National Zoning Atlas is a project that is trying to give easy access to America's more than 30,000 zoning codes. Their data allows people to expose these exclusionary tactics. One of the states where they have very few, if any, maps is in Mississippi, of cities and towns in Mississippi, including Oxford. That's not on the National Zoning Atlas. They're looking for volunteers to work with their data specialists to go to courthouses, pull zoning codes and maps so that they can digitize them and make them searchable. So you can prove these exclusionary policies exist. So let's play this out. Oxford zoning code is digitized, and the community can see the exclusionary land use policies that keep neighborhoods in our town where we live unaffordable and exclude people of color. An affordable housing developer who wants to build in Oxford is recruited, in perhaps a nonprofit organization. They apply for permission to build or approval to change the zoning rules to allow for construction in a high opportunity neighborhood. They're denied, as we know they probably will be. The best people to challenge that denial outside of the builder might be white residents of the neighborhood where the project isn't allowed to build or locate, probably with the help of a fair housing organization like the Mississippi Center for Justice that files the lawsuit. Through court order or negotiation and settlement, that project gets built. And people of color move into that previously all-white community because those white residents spoke up and said, we want an integrated community. The symbolic power of that investment and effort is enormous. It's not the single black mother pleading to be let in on a 7-year-long waiting list. It's her white neighbors inviting her in. And that invitation is the start of belonging. It is the white person giving something to gain a neighbor in exchange. So I go back to those two questions. What do I love? I love an Oxford with integrated neighborhoods. How then shall I live? I don't worry about people who are not answering the call of love, who are standing on the side of hate. I'm with the people who answer the call of love, who stand on the side of love. And I enlist people with the fire of commitment to join me in making it so. And that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. There's clearly a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm thinking of some projects for some students to go into these courthouses to help you find this information, especially librarians who've been trained and learning this, especially some of our USM friends in library school that need some assistantship possibilities. So maybe it might be a good thing. Think about that. Actually, reminded me of a story. So it's my ex in Hattiesburg, actually. She was applying for an apartment. Her name is Dasha, and the landlord is this old white guy. He didn't know that Dasha was a common Russian name, and whenever he saw her, he's like, "Oh, I thought you were black," and he was like, "Great," and so it's like, "What?" So there's like you experienced that firsthand. This sort of he was thinking like, I'm gonna find some excuse to not rent this place out. So yeah, had that experience with somebody that I know. It's crazy. Yeah, there's a lot. And I know JT, you've done a lot here with affordable housing, looking into that. I know in the Oxford area, a lot of people are looking. It's crazy right now. So thank you for all of your work on this.
Thank you.
And he had set this up perfectly for us to dive into the arousing the fire of commitment. We're not going to do that one, sorry. I tried this one. I'm like, all right, if I had maybe one more hour to practice it, I could get it under my fingers. But we're going to take a different approach. We're going to go from this rousing closing piece to a more somber one. I've been thinking about lately how current state of things has been hardening my heart a little bit in the world. With there's a lot to be kind of angry about, and you need to be angry, I think. But sometimes I find myself just hanging on to anger more than I would like, and it's not healthy for me. So I would like we're going to do hymn 1031 in your teal hymnal. That's the smaller of the two. This is called Filled with Loving Kindness. This is a Buddhist meditation. This is a variation on the Metta Sutra, so I make sure I've got in the right key here before I start this. Okay, so it's 1031 called Filled with Loving Kindness. The first time, sing the words as is, and you can see on the bottom, we're going to do this 3 times through. The second time, replace I with you. And then the third time, replace that with we. All right. Yeah, please, you go first.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be holy. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
All right, let's grab the hands to those next to you, and we'll say our closing words. Oh, no, we're not. Hold that for a second. I got to release the chalice flame. Look at me, always forgetting something.
God's birthday, she was
Oh, yeah, Pat, you're going to get to blow out the chalice. Thank you. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Perfect. As we come to the end of this service, may you depart from our time together, buoyed by the spirit of life, delighted by the warmth of our gathering, and renewed in soul and mind. As we extinguish the flame of our chalice, may its lingering spark be carried in your heart until we are together again.
Good job.
There we go.
It's almost a trick candle. All right, now grab the hands of those next to you and we'll say our closing words. So go in peace, believe in peace, create peace, be peace.